UPSA the first, Vice-Chancellor Professor Abednego Okofehi, Professor Joshua Alabi, the first Vice-Chancellor of UPSA, Excellencies and Honorables, Ni Odaifio Walenchi, the first King of Nungwa, the Manklalo of Nungwa, and the Council and Elders of Nungwa, Nime Name, Convocation, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends of the media. Today is historic. To be delivering the first inaugural lecture of the University of Professional Studies, Accra, is indeed a gracious and humbling experience for me. And I like, first of all, to thank God Almighty for granting us all the opportunity to witness this day. Permit me, Chair, to take a few minutes of my time to make some acknowledgements. I'd like to thank my husband, Honorable Professor Joshua Alabi, for bringing out the best in me. Indeed, before a great woman is a greater man, and for me, that man is Professor Joshua Alabi. His wisdom and support has been a constant inspiration for me. I also like to thank my children, Naomi and Joshua Alabi, for their support, understanding, and prayers. I would like to particularly acknowledge the support and contribution of our immediate past council chairman, Justice Ni Ayati, whose persistent reminders about publishing during his 8 years in office went a very long way to push me this far. I'm so glad, sir, that you're here today. Thank you. I'm also so glad that the management, particularly the Vice-Chancellor, the Chancellor, the management of UPSA, my staff, the WAR team, Convocation, Professor Albert Puni and his organizing team, community members, the very good people of Nungwa, where I come from, my dad, Reno Niwang of blessed memory, my mom and my sisters, I say thank you for your support and encouragement. To all my friends and well-wishers, as well as my very own mentor and doctoral supervisor and my mastermind member, as well as my mentor, Professor Dichi, I want to say thank you for all the support. To the friends and well-wishers, I say thank you for making today a part of Ghana's history. Indeed, to God alone be all glory, great things he has done. Dear Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, when I was a young girl, I dreamt of becoming a university graduate one day. I understood that university education would make me a better person in future. My expectations of life after university were great and high. I expected that once I came out of university, I would get a job in an office, get a nice red or black car, and a bungalow. Just as it happened to my father, except that my father had a yellow car and not a red or black one. But that wasn't enough. Something inside of me told me that there was more that I could do, and so I wanted to do more. It was an inner voice hearing the call for a better Ghana as a scholar. From that mysterious voice, God led me to continue forward in my education while also working in higher education. University education was my way of making my difference in the world. Little did I realize that having a quality life in itself was more than merely having a university qualification. After all, a qualification only tells what you can do. What matters is what you are doing, said Alhaji Badamoshi, one of Ghana's most respected educationists. So the question I ask is, what are we doing with our university qualifications in Ghana? Drolo Chancellor, today's lecture is on the theme, Quality of Higher Education in Ghana, the Key Issues. The theme is considered very relevant for 3 reasons. Firstly, because quality of higher education relates directly to quality of life of a people. Secondly, because there has been some concerns about the quality of graduates from our higher institutions of learning in Ghana. And thirdly, because I consider that though we have higher education in Ghana, Ghanaian higher education is not yet born, regardless of the fact that higher education has been around in Ghana for close to 70 years. I have maintained that our higher education is suffering from what I have termed intellectual colonialism. And no one but us can free ourselves. America saw early enough that the grammar-like education did not work for it, and so it created its own educational system. We also need to create our own educational system that is distinctively Ghanaian, yet globally adaptive and competitive. Trolo Chancellor, we cannot talk about quality of higher education without exploring the word quality. So in 2008, my students and I decided to find out what quality means in Ghana. We decided to go to the Medina market to find out from people. We met one gentleman who we asked, and he told us in the Akan language. He said, quality. Now quality, say idea check. Idea check your quality. For this gentleman, quality simply means durability. That is anything that works for you for long. Ladies and gentlemen, for me, quality is what works for you and what you want. If you want it and it does not work for you, it is not quality, no matter how expensive. So the question I ask is Ghana's higher education working for us? Indeed, if higher education is working for us, graduates should be employed. Ghana should have a vaccine for malaria by now. We should not be importing rice and sugar when we are educating agricultural graduates and food scientists like myself. Engineering graduates should produce cars for our roads. Our research should also lead to discoveries and patents, and Ghanaian lecturers and professors should not be relying or over-relying on Western textbooks and Western theories. We should be creating our own, derived from our own cultural values. We should also have thousands of entrepreneurs starting and sustaining global businesses that make Ghana a leading power in Africa and the world. Yet, is any of this happening? Let's take a look around us. What do you see on our streets and in the media? Graduate unemployment, unfortunately, it's a big issue in Ghana at the moment. Aside from the fact that the jobs are simply not enough for the graduates Ghana produces each year, the entrepreneurship education which we thought could mitigate the problem of unemployment is also not creating graduate entrepreneurs. Employers have blamed the problem of unemployment on skills mismatch and unproductive work attitudes. So the question is, why is it so? Academics, on the other hand, argue that the essence of higher education is not to create graduates tailor-made for specific organizations. Rather, it is to produce graduates with general knowledge that can be deployed in any field of endeavor, irrespective of where they find themselves. Academics further argue that it is the responsibility of the employer to train and provide the specific skills required in that organization. While most academics are skilled at making arguments, how many of us have created theories born of Ghanaian culture and blood to make a sustainable impact? For the students, the expectation is earn a qualification, get a job or a promotion. So how do we resolve this tension? Of course, quality of higher education is the solution to graduate unemployment, I opine. Ladies and gentlemen, higher education has three missions: teaching and learning, research and service. If higher education should perform all three functions well enough, we should have quality. But quality needs to be planned, assured, controlled, and improved. Dear Lord Chancellor, to manage quality, we need to answer some 5 questions. And they are, what are we trying to do? That is the purpose. Where are we trying to do it? That is the context. How are we trying to do it? That is the methods. How do we know it works? That is evaluation and feedback from stakeholders. And how do we change in order to improve? Dear Lord Chancellor, the quality of higher education can be achieved in 2 ways. So there are 2 frameworks for managing quality of higher education. One is by managing input, process, output, and outcomes, or by managing the 4 dimensions of quality of higher education, namely relevance, recognition, functionality, and comparability. So let's take a look at the first framework and the issues. Lord Chancellor, a critical analysis of Ghana's tertiary education quality assurance approach indicates that it is largely input-based. In fact, almost all the National Council for Tertiary Education norms are input-based, and those norms inform accreditation processes and quality assurance practices at the institutional level. It is obvious that we cannot get quality without managing the inputs or the quality of the raw materials. So that is established. But we also need quality processes. Let's take, for example, that we in this room are given equal amounts of ingredients or resources from the same source and asked to prepare stew. Is our stew likely to taste different? And the answer, I guess, is yes. Why? Because of the methods we use and the processes that we use. So if the process is poor, no matter how good the raw materials or ingredients you start with, the end product would be poor. However, bad raw materials can be adjusted before use. At the end of the process, we also need to check whether what we expected is exactly what we have gotten, and that is the quality of output. The quality of outcome simply gives us feedback on how what we have done is practically working in the field. Here too, it has to do with what the employer says that graduates are doing for them. So what are the key issues of Ghana's input-based approach? First of all, we believe in Ghana that the quality of input translates directly into quality of output. This assumption informs the overemphasis on entry requirements, academic staff credentials, and quality of resources. Here, the perception is that entry grades like ABC automatically translates into quality of graduates. How we teach, what we teach, the attitudes and the skills required by industry and labor market is not much of a concern to us. It also appears that there does not seem to be a structured mechanism for getting the needs, requirements, expectations of industry. The fundamental foundation for educational psychology that is required to produce greatness is almost non-existent in our higher education in Ghana. So what exactly is the issue with the entry requirements? General Chancellor, in Ghana, students or a student with a D grade in any core subject from the SHS is not qualified to enter the university. And graduates with third class do not also qualify to do masters. How misguided? Do we have any substantial evidence to suggest that people with D grades are not capable of university education? What is the basis of the D grade requirement that robs young men and women and their families of the joy of higher education and their aspirations to make a better future through higher education, like I wanted to do for my grandpa, Ashley? We need a comprehensive study into this matter, and I call on the NCTE to provide the people of Ghana with the basis of the D grade requirement. Now to the issue of quality of academic staff. The National Accreditation Board requirement for teaching is a research master's, but the Fair Wages Commission promotes doctorate. The problem is that universities in Ghana today are made to employ doctorate degree holders. The question I ask is, how many doctorates do we have? And how many do we produce in a year in Ghana, and in which areas? Are they sufficient enough to provide for the needed staff-students ratio that takes care of quality? The assumption also that once you have a doctorate or a research master's, you can teach in a university is again misguided. In fact, unlike the secondary and primary levels, teaching competency is unfortunately not required for becoming an academic for teaching in the university in Ghana. Yet, at the lower levels, teaching competencies are recognized and even form the basis of differentiated salaries. The National Accreditation Board and the National Council for Tertiary Education may have to reconsider this requirement for becoming an academic and include teaching and learning competencies. General Chancellor, another issue with the quality of academic staff in Ghana is the fact that as a country, we frown on experience to the extent that we glorify fresh graduates with almost little experience over masters with extensive field experience and professional qualification. But the question is, How can anyone give something that he or she does not have? How can people without field experience impart practical knowledge in the classroom? It is important to recognize that some homegrown PhDs go through the programs without any industry experience, and we expect them to impart practical experience in class. Definitely, that is not possible. Furthermore, what's the focus of the PhD program? Do all PhD holders obtain the critical scholarly thinking that push them to challenge the validity of the Western theories in our context? For example, as a chemistry student in the University of Cape Coast, I produced parasol and proofing on paper using chemical equations that I have chewed. I also learned about saponification without visiting a local Alatasamina production village to see how to prepare the sought-after potassium soap, popularly called Alatasamina. Yet, anytime I visited Makala or Medina Market, I saw locally produced parasol and akasha, a scrubbing powder believed to be a byproduct of parasol. Now, just after my BSc, I proceeded to do my master's. There also, at the master's level, I studied quality control without visiting the factory even once to see how quality is controlled in industry. In my usual curious nature, I attempted asking the lecturer some practical questions in class. It's very normal to have the phone bell when we teach in class. So at the master's level, I studied quality control without visiting the factory even once to see how quality is controlled practically. In my usual curious nature, I attempted to ask the professor some practical questions in class. And with a very serious look, he turned in my direction and said, "Why do you always preempt me? I won't have you disrupt my class." I believe that if this lecturer knew that he was creating my future career, a career that would affect millions of nations and people around the world, his response would have been different, even if he did not have answers to my questions. Should I have continued straight for my PhD, what experience would I have had to pass on? Dear Lord Chancellor, it is therefore critical for Ghana to make work experience learning internships, which we popularly call attachments, compulsory, a compulsory for both students and academic staff. Academic staff internships should be a requirement for promotion. Why should we, at this time, have some students being charged to pay for introductory letters to do attachments when it's supposed to be our core business? Practical experience in learning how to teach and make an impact should be a minimum requirement for creating qualified staff to teach. Without an understanding of how people learn, the instruments of education is like a dull kitchen knife trying to perform microscopic surgery. Let's look at China, who has made an incredible advancement in the past few decades, from a third world country to a top economy in the world. Their academic staff spend 3 to 6 months in a teacher training program before stepping into the classroom. This is one of the many secrets of their advancement into a major world power. We can also do the same to enhance the quality of our teaching staff. Dear Lord Chancellor, now to the issue of resources. When it comes to resources, we need to ensure that we are not caught up in the no money syndrome to allow mediocrity to crystallize in Ghana's higher education institutions. In this respect, we need to reprioritize education and make resources available for it. Resources should not be limited to infrastructure and personnel emoluments. It should include resources for laboratory work, practicals, incubation, workplace experience, and international exchanges. As a country, why do we continue to spread so thinly by establishing more and more higher institutions of learning when those that are existing already are not well resourced? There are so many waste and efficiencies within the system that we would have to address to allow the efficient use of available resources, from strategic finance to the wisdom of leaders with courage to take the right action. The truth is, quality is not free, and it requires resources. To address the inadequate resources from government, Mr. Chairman, some public universities have taken it upon themselves and are struggling to generate internal funds to support quality. But here again, government is already stretching its neck and attempting to take 30% of the internally generated funds. Should this happen, the burden for quality standards would either be pushed onto students or quality would further be affected. We should be mindful of the fact that there is a limit to which we can ask students to pay fees. Such government interferences are not healthy for the universities and can undermine quality. I therefore wish to call on the current crop of vice-chancellors, with my own vice-chancellor here, Professor Abednego, to ensure that they do not allow any forms of intimidation that can undermine quality, just as their predecessors did. They should remember that they have a responsibility to uphold, defend, and protect the values of academic freedom, autonomy, and service. Furthermore, our university leaders need to develop educational systems that break the walls of the colonialist jail of education. Now to the key issues with quality of process. Brother Chairman, quality of process relates to the question, what are we teaching and how are we teaching it and why? Are we teaching for certification as it seems to be right now in Ghana, or we are teaching for critical and creative thinking? How do we teach it? Chew, pour, pass, get a certificate and forget? Or rather, contributive learning that calls the learner's experience and context into action. Additionally, our system of education simply traps us from growing beyond our current reality because it does not generate the needed creative thinking, problem-solving skills, and productive work attitudes needed to promote and support sustainable development. Truth is, we are trying and attempting to solve current problems with the same thinking that created them to start with. And this is what I have called the self-limiting thought syndrome. All we're trying to do is to dig deeper the pit in which we are. For example, how do we expect graduates to be innovators and critical thinkers and solvers when our instructional approaches do not enact innovation, critical thinking, and problem solving? In fact, external examiners and accreditation panelists will bother you when you attempt to challenge the status quo and introduce innovating teaching and learning practices. So much of our education relies on regurgitation as a primary form of assessment. How can we empower our students to think critically and innovate from a curriculum design perspective? Brother Chancellor, another issue with the quality of process, and now I speak to NAB, is the lack of programmatic benchmarks for certain disciplines. Programmatic benchmarks spell out clearly the expected learning outcomes, which should inform the instructional design, content, teaching and learning resources needed, and assessment strategies required. As such, without programmatic benchmarks, quality may be affected. But should programmatic benchmarks be completely available for all disciplines today? Trust me, Ghana will need to retrain, retool, and monitor to ensure that such benchmarks can be deployed effectively. Ladies and gentlemen, in a recent conference, one old and respected professor took the podium and began to read his handwritten notes. He soon noted that the audience were not with him. Then he announced, "Pardon me, I'm BBC, meaning born before computer." Jolo Chancellor, we cannot talk quality of educational processes today without technology, computer, the World Wide Web, and the social media. Social media is already reducing the cost of research and providing value for manual teaching and learning. Using WhatsApp, for example, to facilitate teaching and learning could not have happened 5 years ago. Such tools can help students integrate their learning with the real world and begin to break down the walls of the classroom. Ladies and gentlemen, another issue with quality of process is the need to provide incentives and motivation for teaching excellence. Brother Chancellor, at the primary and secondary levels, teachers are recognized for teaching excellence with national awards. Yet, academics are not. Innovation in teaching is often not rewarded in higher education institutions in Ghana. On a more serious note, at the institutional level, teaching excellence will have to be reweighted for promotion of academic staff. It is interesting to note that becoming a professor like me here in Ghana relies largely on research publications. Though teaching is required, it is often downplayed to the number of years of teaching and students' lecturer evaluation results. Now to the issue of quality of output. Brother Chancellor, quality of output has to do with how higher education institutions ensure that the graduates meet standards. And the question is, against what reference do we judge the quality of our graduates? Again, this requires a comprehensive set of programmatic benchmarks for all disciplines. The National Accreditation Board recognized the need for programmatic benchmarks and initiated the process long ago. Unfortunately, this is still work in progress. And I urge the National Accreditation Board to expedite action on the well-thought-out initiative. Brother Chancellor, to the issue of quality of outcome. Quality of outcome has to do with the feedback we get from the labor market or industry and how we use that feedback to inform content of academic programs. How are our universities proactively learning about market trends or labor market trends, requirements and demands and expectations? If we do not know what labor market requires, how can we fulfill them? How do we know whether what we are doing as universities is working well? So if industry tells us that the graduates we are producing for them are not meeting their expectations, why do we argue? This summarizes the entire quality issue. Brother Chancellor, with these few words, very few of them, I would now like to turn my attention to the second framework, which has to do with ensuring relevance, recognition, functionality, and comparability. So the first has to do with relevance of higher education in Ghana. Brother Chancellor, we of course cannot talk about relevance without examining purpose. Relevance has to do with the purpose of higher education. So what is Ghana trying to do with her higher education? Do we know the purpose of higher education in Ghana and what it's supposed to produce for us? Who is supposed to tell us? Is it the National Development Planning Commission, NDPC, the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations, or the Ministry of Education, or the National Council for Tertiary Education? If we do not know what higher education is supposed to do for us, how do we make it work for us as a country? And if it does not work for us, can we say that it is quality? So how do we determine relevance in Ghana? Brother Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, the determination of relevance of academic programs is currently the mandate of the NCTE. What does the NCTE do? They would normally ask that the institution that is applying justify why they believe a new program is relevant and to indicate what makes that program unique from other programs. It is not clear, actually, what forms the basis of what the NCTE considers relevant. Whether there is a strategic data from the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations or from the National Development Planning Commission or the Ministry of Education, I am not sure. But one thing that I'm sure of is that within the limits of my work in the field, I'm yet to come across any labor market data repository for planning market responsive and strategic academic programs in Ghana. So how then does the NCTE assess relevance of academic programs? For example, how many doctors, nurses, lawyers, managers, accountants, architects, engineers do we need in Ghana in the next 5 years? Do we know? Maybe someone would have to show me. Whether the doctors stay or they don't stay is another issue. And here NDPC and the NCTE should be in the position to provide information on demand and supply of higher education graduates in Ghana. And they should be able to do this on a consistent and reliable basis. For example, in UPSA, in the last 5 to 6 years, we have collected our own labor market data. The university analyzes this demand for qualification and skills from newspaper advertisements and online sources. And this, I believe, can be replicated, improved, and scaled up at the national level. It is true that a few of the professions, like medicine or doctors, etc., are not advertised in the newspapers. But I believe that still such a process can provide information on trends in qualification and skills required. Another issue with the relevance checks by NCTE is the fact that it is limited to public institutions, leaving the private institutions to figure out what is relevant by themselves. Furthermore, it is inherent, there seems to be an inherent duplication of relevance checks, as the NAB's process of asking institutions to establish the philosophy of programs during program accreditation in itself builds in some relevance checks. Consequently, the relevance checks of academic programs are duplicated, and it appears that the latter, which is the NAB, seem to provide better value in this respect than the NCTE. It might be prudent, in my opinion, to have the NAB add the issue of relevance checks to its mandate to remove the duplication and enhance effectiveness. Brother Chancellor, another issue with the NCTE when it comes to relevance checks is the fact that because of the enormity of the tasks and responsibilities placed on it, applications sometimes take close to 2 years before feedback is provided on relevance determination. Some institutions have to wait for the verdict for so long before they move on, and this can be particularly frustrating. A typical example was the introduction of our law programs amidst many others here in the UPSA. Should the NCTE cede the function of relevance checks to the NAB, it would afford it more time to focus on very pertinent strategic functions like collating labor market information on demand and supply of skills and qualification needed in the labor market. We need to bear in mind that universities have quite limited knowledge of the skills and attitudes required by industry, and therefore this makes it very difficult for them to fulfill them. This will require a collaboration between the key stakeholders, the NDPC, the NCTE, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Labor and Employment and Labor Relations. Again, at the institutional level, there will be the need for professional advisory boards and collaboration with the Association of Ghanaian Industry and Ghanaian Employers Association, among others, to validate curriculum design. Dear Lord Chancellor, profound higher education strategy cannot be established without a normative reference in the form of a national tertiary education policy, from which proposed strategic plan would have to be derived or aligned. Till now, the tertiary education policy remains work in progress under the NCTE. Dear Lord Chancellor, it is important for us to realize that we cannot afford to divide our efforts with limited strategic focus. Or could we focus our efforts on a few key nationalistic competencies that Ghana can leverage to lead Africa and the world within the globalization? We as a nation need to find our own place within the globalization, just as Korea placed its focus on technology, innovation, and entertainment. Singapore also focused on finance and port management, and China focused on manufacturing. Ghana also needs to find a few strategic fields for its place among globalization. Interestingly, academia is divided over aligning educational initiatives and programmatic programs to a national strategy or plan. In a recent interview with vice chancellors, it was interesting to note that there was a sharp division in perspectives on whether or not educational programs, particularly research, should be aligned to national development priorities. Some opined that aligning research to and academic programs to a set of national priorities will restrict innovation, curiosity and undermined the principle of academic freedom, while others held strongly that there is the need to align academic priorities to national plans and that this is critical. It might be helpful in this respect for the NCTE to provide consistent data, as I have already mentioned, on academic programs and research. And perhaps NCTE should be able to tell us what our research output is doing for Ghana, how many patents Ghana has been able to produce so far, as research allowances are paid to all of us, including me. We need to provide accountability in research, and Ghana's research should offer value for money. In this respect, lessons can be learned from South Africa and other leading nations in various fields. Draw your Chancellor to the issue of recognition. Recognition of higher education in Ghana is actually the heart of NAB. And this is established through accreditation and the establishment of equivalencies for external qualifications. It is worthy of note that Ghana's accreditation system is one of the strongest on the African continent. This is because it combines both institutional accreditation and program accreditation and deploys rigid standard procedures. It must be noted that not all countries have accreditation systems or agencies in Ghana, in Africa. Additionally, some countries that have accreditation systems do not require institutional accreditation, but Ghana does. Worthy of note is the fact that higher education has been commoditized, and with the emergence of different forms of provisions, including transnational education, the term university before then represented the seal of authority and recognition. At the time, before these various forms of provision, it was enough to bank on the university for quality of output. The proliferation of the various arrangements, including public and private, for-profit, not-for-profit, transnational, online, distance, and open universities. In addition to this, the massification of higher education due to increasing demand has also made the need for recognition critical, and this is why accreditation is very important. So with such a strong accreditation system in Ghana, what are the opportunities for improvement? One, Mr. Chairman, NAB needs to shift from the largely input-based approach and incorporate strong mechanisms for process, output, and outcome-based. When NAB is accrediting programs, for example, much of what it looks at is the quality of raw materials, that is entry requirements, staff qualifications, and physical resources, including libraries and laboratories. What is taught and how it is taught is simply the task of the institutions themselves. And there is no system of checking whether the learning outcomes are achieved and how the institutions compare with each other. If NAB has to strengthen this, some lessons could be learned from the ACBSP process, of which UPSA has been a part. And also, that would require programmatic benchmarks. So again, we see that programmatic benchmarks keep coming up now and again. There is also the need for a quality assurance framework for higher education, and I wish to recommend that NAB will revisit and adopt the work that was done by the Quality Working Group under the Codestra project, of which they were a part, as well as the NCTE. And lessons can be learned from East Africa, the UK, Mauritius, and South Africa, amongst a few to mention. already mentioned is the need for programmatic benchmarks, and this is very critical because without it, there is the situation of variations among accreditation panels and experts. Different accreditation panels rely on their own judgments and experiences. For example, why should some MBAs be 1 year and others 2 years in the country? If you ask an accreditation panelist what is the total credit pass that a student will need to become an undergraduate, it is not clear because it's not stated anywhere. So they rely on what they do in their own institutions. This is a matter of urgency. To the issue of affiliation, and this is a very hot one. Dear Lord Chancellor, affiliation is a big issue in Ghana now because private institutions have complained that the affiliation system that we practice in Ghana is not effective. The private institutions observe that affiliation stifles innovation and it is too expensive. Indeed, if affiliation were to be effective, why should over 2,000 students from one private university alone, we had over 1,400 students being sacked or asked to go from the university when they were in their 3rd and final years? Where were their mentors? If those students got D grades or other substandard grades at the point of entry, but managed to pass all university examinations and got to the 3rd or final year under the very supervision of the mentors, why should they be sacked? After all, these students progressed under the very watch of the institutional mentors. So how did they fail? Or rather, it was the mentors who failed. Dear Lord Chancellor, it is my considered opinion that affiliation is more an income-generating machinery for public institutions in Ghana than a quality assurance mechanism. Let me put on record that affiliation fees are quite costly, ranging from $10,000 to $15,000 as a one-off fee, in addition to $2,000 to $5,000 per program per year, besides other costs. How do we expect the private institutions to survive and provide quality? Considering the origins of affiliation as a colonial concept, when Ghana first had the University College, and it had to be affiliated to the University of London because there was nothing for Ghana to learn from, then that colonial concept of dependency and tying our higher education to some other forms of string began. Unfortunately, at that time, there was no accreditation system in place. With the current stringent accreditation system we have in Ghana, one wonders what the true and real value of affiliation is. Theoretically, affiliation may appear useful or even a best practice, but from a practical point of view, the value actually stares us in the face. Number 4, like I said earlier, there is the need for a qualifications framework to establish equivalencies. And in this respect, we need a national qualifications framework, which, amongst other things, will give value to the technical and vocational system and meaning to the TVET qualifications framework, which already exists and which needs to feed into a national one. Dear Lord Chancellor, now to the issue of functionality of programs. And here, functionality brings us back to the issue of relevance, which I have extensively discussed. So I move on to the issue of comparability. Ladies and gentlemen, comparability simply has to do with who and what we are comparing our graduates with. Ratings and rankings are now the rules of the game of global comparability of higher education. How is Ghana performing at the global level is the question we should be asking. We should not be naive in Ghana. Higher education is a global commodity, tradable on the global competitive market. And ratings and rankings are subtle marketing tactics to attract international students and research funding. International higher education is therefore now big business, and many countries have internationalization strategies for higher education to compel the institutions to make themselves meaningful in the global competition. We therefore need to see internationalization of higher education as both a strategic and diplomatic, as well as international trade issues, and prioritize it. Ghana therefore needs to explore means of making itself visible and viable on the global scale. Ghanaian universities as a whole would have to develop a national strategy with respect to actions and outcomes for ranking and rating of Ghanaian institutions. It should not simply be left for individual institutions as it is right now. This will require a rigorous knowledge management system, both at the national and institutional level. And I like to call on all beings of international affairs to form a network and start working with the relevant authorities towards the development of a national internationalization strategy in Ghana. Jolo Chancellor, we cannot talk about quality without talking about governance. So the question I ask is, we have about 4 institutions in Ghana that have responsibility for quality of tertiary education: the NAB, the NCTE, NAPTEX, and COTVET. And there seem to be some overlaps, and therefore these institutions need harmonization. From a governance perspective, structural enhancements are also required. At the same time, the hierarchical structures should embed humility into the systems. Finally, interrogating these 2 governance systems and what will create and sustain quality education in Ghana is critical. And that means that there is the need to really look for means of harmonizing. We should also be examining the antecedents that led to the proposal of the Universities Rationalization Committee in 1987 and the subsequent amalgamation of universities and polytechnics in 1991 to constitute one level of education called the tertiary level. Consequently, the National Council for Higher Education had to give way to the National Council for Tertiary Education. Today, tertiary education institutions cover a wide spectrum. At the time when the amalgamation was done, there were only 3 public universities and a few polytechnics. Now we have about 138 tertiary institutions as of the count by the end of 2015, according to the Education Sector Performance Report of 2016. One wonders whether it is not yet time to look again at this governance system of tertiary education. To be honest, seem to be overburdened at this point. It may also be very prudent for the sponsors of the various bills, the NAB draft bill, and the NCTE draft bill to expedite action on passing these bills to iron out the overlaps. Droller Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, Ghana's higher education system is a robust one, yet there are certain quality issues that continue to slow us down from advancement as a nation. It is clear that industry and employers are generally not satisfied